Hello, everyone. My name is Madeleine Key. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I know it's getting a little late, but Bruce, with all due respect to the other panels, most certainly saved the best for last. So tune in. I have been writing about inventors and invention commercialization for about 15 years now. While I have not chosen to exercise my creative and inventive muscle yet, inventing runs in my family. My father studied art, became an entrepreneur, discovered the licensing business model, and realized that he could make a living and support his family, like the creators on stage here have done, by sharing his creativity with the world. He's now the named inventor on about 24 patents for packaging technology. My grandfather, an aerospace engineer, received a patent in 1969 for a better method of shipping lobsters from coast to coast. Enough about me, though. I hope it's become obvious to you today that across the innovation ecosystem, there's a great desire to increase the diversity of those participating. Everyone in this room and those who are watching at home understands how rewarding it is to contribute your ideas to create new products and services, especially those that improve the world. It's rewarding on a personal level, it's potentially financially rewarding, and it's also economically valuable. Ideas and their implementation are what drive economic growth. I know that everyone is capable of inventing because inventing is part of who we are. It's part of our humanity. However, significant disparities exist among class, gender, and race at every stage of the innovation ecosystem. During this panel, we're going to explore the chasm that Kara Miller did such an excellent job of explaining and kicking off our morning with. Before I introduce my esteemed panelists, I want to explicitly encourage them to share their personal stories and anecdotes. I've heard some of them on our prep calls, but our audience hasn't, and they're absolutely priceless. So, without further ado, let me introduce. First, I have sitting most close to me, Maysa Razavi is the Director of Global Brand Protection and Supply Chain Security at Moderna. Previously, she led the International Trademark Association's anti-counterfeiting work. Sitting next to her, we have James Howard, the Executive Director of the Black Inventors Hall of Fame. His many accomplishments include designing over 400 products, obtaining 18 patents, teaching countless students, and founding an award-winning design agency servicing Fortune 100 clients. Sitting next to him is Muriel Medard, an inventor and the NEC Professor of Software Science and Engineering at MIT, where she leads the Network Coding and Reliable Communications Group. The vast majority of her more than 60 patents have been licensed or acquired. And joining us virtually, we're so glad to have her here with us, is Arlyne Simon, an inventor and solutions architect at Intel and the author of Abby Invents. She advocates for teaching children about the power of inventing. Let's get into our first question here. And I will sit down and join you. Hello. In an episode of Understanding IP Matters, the podcast hosted by Bruce Berman, IP University educator James Conley described a relationship between intellectual property, self-esteem, and agency. So my question for the panel, and this is directed at all of you, did filing intellectual property make you more confident in yourself as a creative force? How is understanding what intellectual property is and how to use it empowering?
Testing. Thank you. First, before I answer that question, I just want to let the audience know that I'm still reeling from Tiffany Norcross's monologue earlier in the day. Great job, Tiffany. I believe that IP awareness and IP application is in fact empowering. When I got my very first patent, or one of my very first patents, I had no clue as to how effective it would be, right? But yet, in the ensuing 40 years, it is a product that is continuing to save infants' lives each day as we speak, where I was able to design a neonatal pressure relief valve, right, that resuscitated infants at birth. So for me, it is most fulfilling when placed within the context of a service model, right? So you're able to perpetually be motivated to serve, to take your creative ability and to apply it into an end product that is going to serve a higher need. And nothing can be more fulfilling than that.
No, I think you just said it beautifully. I would add another aspect around, specifically the time of filing or receiving the patent. I think you've also talked about later having the patent used, which is, its own really fun buzz, obviously. But I think one of the nice things about the patenting process, and I think in particular looking at, diversity in invention, is that, it is a way also of establishing inventorship, which is undeniable, right? And, you might, it happens very often, particularly in engineering, that something is discovered and is rediscovered. And, more than anecdotally, it so happens that maybe somebody who rediscovered it is, more looking like what people expect the person to look like, and then, gets with more citations. But the patent is undeniable. That's it. It's you. Okay? You did it. And there was a search. Now, of course, maybe there was a mistake in, in who did it first. But it's like, yes, you published a paper about this, but I patented it 2 years earlier. Done. Okay, and I think that's, to me, that sort of undeniable protection is very empowering, in my view, because it really is, entirely blind to your demographic.
I want to kind of build upon that thought. So I like to think of intellectual property as, putting a value on the intangible. And if you think about real property, you get a deed, and that says that this is yours. Or I got a law degree, and I have that degree, and no one can deny that from me. So getting an IP right, it's doing that as well. And I think that the interesting thing about IP being intangible, it's not like I own this building now. It's something where you can do so much more with it, and it gives you different perspectives. Like and I'm a trademark attorney, so we think a lot about brand. So if you're building a brand, are you building a brand that says does my brand show that I'm a woman? And that's empowering for whatever reason. Or maybe I'm trying to be an artist who creates a mouse that everyone seems to love, as Disney would have done, and build that relationship. And when you are creating a brand, you're giving it to the world, and it means something different to everyone as well. I used to work in fashion, in the way that, I worked at Chanel for a while, and people love that brand so much. It's not about Coco Chanel or the company that owns it. It's like something really personal to them. So I think that that's really empowering as well when you think about branding and how much you're influencing. It gives that ability based on this right, which you have that paper, which validates that you are the owner of. So I think it's a valuable tool if you know how to use it.
Arlyne, do you have a comment?
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to participate virtually. Yes, for me, when I became an inventor, I was a graduate student, and I can honestly say that getting a patent was very empowering. It was a major boost for my self-confidence, and it was an instant cure for imposter syndrome. And when I work with kids, I like to relate inventing as magic, because like one of the panelists mentioned, it's very much taking something unseen, something intangible that's only in your head, and you're now converting that into a tangible product that other people can use, and you're able to save lives that way. So absolutely, intellectual property is very empowering.
I'd like to ask a few follow-up questions. James, you spoke about how for you it was really the empowering part was knowing that something you had invented was improving people's lives. And in my experience, that is what animates inventors, is not merely the process of invention, which is fantastic, but it's also having this great desire that someone else is benefiting from their invention, that it does make it out into the world. You know, it's impossible to have a conversation about diversifying who's participating in patenting without talking about cost and the cost of patents and the investment that you make as an individual to decide to spend your hard-earned money that way. So I guess a question I have for the panel is really exploring that, is how were you able to fund some of your inventions, and as we think and look about helping this next group of people, do you have ideas about how to reduce that financial burden or make it more accessible, or what would your advice be for an under-resourced inventor who has their creativity, who knows patenting is important, but is struggling to justify making that high cost?
So I think I'm glad that you brought up the issue of cost, because patenting is not free. As you know, I don't need to tell this crowd, but you know, translating an invention into a patent that's going to hold up to scrutiny is non-trivial. And of course, we all know how to do a bit of that, but you know, you really are better off having professional help. And then of course you have all the fees that come, you know, the maintenance fees and so on. It's like you were talking about owning a building. You know, you have to pay the real estate taxes and you know, keep the heating on and so on. And if you're going to fix something, you know, if you're going to build it also, you should probably have a professional involved rather than doing your own DIY project. My experience was that most of my patenting was done through the university at MIT. And so there, it is an investment, but it's a conversation with the technology licensing office of asking them to invest in that patent. Actually, I don't know if Myron Casaraba is here, but there he is. So he was one of the people who, you know, believed in me and invested. But it's still, you know, a conversation around an investment, even if it doesn't come out of your own pocket. You know, you're using up your chips, right? In particular, if you are a junior faculty or junior inventor, or say a graduate student, as you know was just described, then you know you're asking people to bet on you. Right, and that's always a difficult thing to ask people to do, to bet on somebody, because you know there has to be a first patent. Okay, you know, when the person already has 30 patents and have all been licensed, all right, yeah, there's a chance the next one won't, but it's much lower, right? But when you see somebody coming, particularly maybe with a technology that you don't already have in your portfolio, that's a big question mark as to, you know, how to encourage people. I think it'd be great to have a little bit of a fund whenever they, you know, for basically just taking chances. You know, that yes, of course, you want to keep funding, you know, your inventors who are likely to have a good outcome. Fantastic. You know, you're not leaving that, but sort of then reserving some of the money that comes out of that for a fund for taking chances.
I believe that in today's world, the challenge of pursuing patents at a somewhat affordable rate is somewhat daunting. They can, in fact, be expensive. But as I told you earlier, my very first patent was attained over 40 years ago. And that was before the advent of the internet and before the creation of what we call the legal Zoom and places like that, right? Who can help to sort of mitigate some of the expenses that a patent seeker would have to engage. But I still believe in old school boots to the ground. I still see of some value in doing some of your original legwork on your own, right? But most importantly, what I try to tell anyone wanting to seek a patent right now is tell your story. Get your families to invest in your story. Become very good at sharing your story. And then you see that arc of empathy begin to impact your efforts to get that patent off the ground. So these are just two of the tips that I share. Still boots to the ground and tell your story. Open up. You know, Pablo Coelho, the writer of the book The Alchemist, he shares that, you know, put your desires and your wishes out there, and the entire universe will conspire to help you attain them, right? So get it out there. And Uncle Bob will more than likely throw in a few bucks to help you get that patent going.
Arlyne, how about you? Would you like to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, one of the resources that I don't know if many people are aware of is the U.S. Patent Pro Bono Office, being able to help patent seekers who meet a certain income level. They're able to get help from other patent pro bono lawyers to be able to reduce the cost burden of securing a patent. And very similar to what James said, you know, today with the age of the internet, there's Kickstarter campaigns, there's GoFundMe. When you're able to share your story without going to the very specific details of your technology, because of course you don't want to share your idea completely for the world to know before somebody poaches your idea and patents it. But if you're able to highlight the general problem that you're trying to solve and be able to do it in such an engaging and inviting way, you'll be surprised at how many people actually, you know, pitch in to help you achieve the necessary funding to secure your patent. So there are many ways that are innovative that you can definitely use to reduce that cost. As a graduate student, I didn't have to, unfortunately, come up with my own money to file my patent. The tech transfer office at University of Michigan was the one who foot the bill. But of course, when you now have to license the technology out of the university, now you're the one responsible for paying the cost that the university took a chance on you as well. But these are things that you can think about as you secure patents.
And if I could just add to that, I think attorneys can provide pro bono services. I haven't done it since the pandemic, but I used to be quite active in the volunteer lawyers for the arts organization. And I think it's really important as attorneys to give back time. I know some bars require it to be part of to practice law in your different states. So I just think it's really important. I think the requirement in New Jersey is 25 hours to apply to be an attorney and sit for the bar. In New York, now you have a 50-hour requirement for pro bono. But I don't know if it should be a requirement. It should be something that we should all do to give back to this community that's giving us the work to do what we like to do. So I think it's really important.
I think when Dan Brown mentioned earlier that the solo inventor is a rare bird, this question of affordability and accessibility is deeply interwoven within that. And that's why you see inventors flourishing in the university context and in big corporations. Moving on to another question. This is also one that rings me as very relevant to many of the conversations you've been hearing today, specifically about IP education and IP awareness. There's a widespread perception that intellectual property should be left to the legal profession, that it's really only for lawyers. You might draw this conclusion if you look at what the conferences are about intellectual property or who runs the Patent and Trademark Office. how can we make strides to alleviate this myth, which certainly is preventing people from learning and embracing intellectual property?
So I think we have to go back and see where IP law originated. So copyrights, I think copyrights comes from the French philosophy where it's the right of an author. The author is giving their part of their soul in this piece of creation that they've given to the world, and we don't want anybody to ruin it, their piece of their body, to the world. And so you have this protection for that reason. With an inventor, with patents, it's all about the inventor. And in trademark, it's all about consumers. That's what the base of all of these laws are. It's not about the attorneys. The attorneys are just, to me at least, we're just a vehicle to make sure that you get your rights and that you are protected. In my space, right now at Moderna, patient safety is the most important thing to me. I do everything for patient safety. And I think that can get lost, especially because you're right, there are a lot of conferences where lawyers talk to lawyers about the nuances of the law. And I think there's also a lot of conferences where we're talking to each other about the importance of IP, but it's really about talking to the public about it and getting them involved. IP is everywhere. It's not this complicated thing that's meant to take away from the public. It is really a service to share ideas, share innovation, and protect consumers. It's all about the public.
I mean, I think that certainly the language of patenting can be a bit daunting. I know when I started, frankly, it read like gobbledygook. I was like, that's not what I said. I remember, and I referenced so and so teaches, and I would read reference whatever, and like, you call that teaching? Nobody would explain anything this way. So there has, there is an obstacle there, right? And this goes back to the issue of, having to get somebody to do a pro bono or whatever. You can have a very well-written document which explains what you did, but there is a job in transforming that into a patent, right? And claim construction is an art of its own. So there is a learning curve there. I think, however, it's great that some people are doing it as graduate students. I mean, once you do, it's like somebody gave you a piece of code in a language you didn't learn. Maybe, you could sort of make out more or less what it did at the beginning, but it wouldn't look like it really made sense. And then you go, okay, I'm going to learn the language, and off you go, and then you can read it, right? So there is a step there. There is a step. I don't know whether there's any way to make that step less onerous, but certainly, the legal aspects around claim construction are non-trivial in my view. Now, it's super useful, I think, as an inventor to gain some information, some expertise there. I mean, not that I'm an expert, but so at least be unafraid or fluent or recognize what's going on. It makes you a much better inventor, not just in the writing of the patent, but also in the thinking around your invention. I think that it really makes the invention much more deliberate, clean, thoughtful. So it's not just about translating, I think.
I try to encourage anyone whom I'm mentoring to try to get their patent attorney to become a collaborator and a mentor, right? I mentioned earlier the importance of telling a story. Well, it starts with your patent attorney, all right? And I think back to Tony Cuoco, one of my patent attorneys from many, many years back. Well, the thing that propelled me to constantly bring a patent opportunity to Tony was that he invested an interest in hearing my stories, all right? And it may have had to do with the fact that I always picked up lunch, I'm not sure. But he lent an attentive ear, right? And he became compassionate. And again, that arc of empathy that I'm speaking of, you're going to find that that is a continuum in this entire IP ecosystem, right? That's what binds all of us. That's what binds the understanding. So if you can get a patent attorney that exudes that type of empathy and concern and who is willing to listen to your story, yes, I do think that you will become more informed and they'll enjoy that experience all the more. And perhaps you'll be a little surprised when you get that last bill. Maybe it'll be a little less than what you anticipated. Arlyne?
I like to think of lawyers as very much translators. When I'm a biomedical engineer, so I'm the one with the domain expertise in the digital transformation of healthcare. But I'm not an expert in writing the legal jargon of protecting my work. And so having a conversation with a lawyer on the work that you're doing, the problem you're trying to solve, who you're trying to solve it for, what your independent claim is, then that allows the lawyer to really carve out a space that really is protecting and your IP and allowing you to own your work. And so it, like James said, is very much a collaborative effort. I'm not going to be able to write a patent on my own with the legalese language, but the lawyer is not able to come up with the idea. It's my idea. And so it's very much a collaborative effort between the inventor and the lawyer to create a good patent.
I think all of the comments from our panelists really speak to the need to diversify the legal profession as well. And it's encouraging to see that within the IP space is also a great area of focus of how can we have patent attorneys who are working so intimately with inventors and trademark attorneys and copyright attorneys really reflect the diversity of the creators as well. Muriel, I'd like to direct a specific question to you, and Arlyne, I hope you might weigh in as well. Women have always been inventors. Historically, though, their contributions, particularly to industrial fields, have been undercounted. In conversation, you shared that the creativity of female engineers is not accurately reflected by the intellectual property filings, that maybe there's a lag in translation. Why is that, would you say?
That's a good question. I didn't think I have quite an answer for it. I mean, I think that, to decide to patent, as we've just discussed, you need to, first of all, assert, right? You're asserting rights to that. Which may sometimes be an obstacle. And then you also need to invest, particularly if you're in a company or a university, you need somebody in effect to invest in you, right? And I mean I think it's again going back to sort of an investment gap, which of course is observed widely in entrepreneurship. It is a form of entrepreneurship, right? And very often actually it's a precursor to entrepreneurship, but it's a form of entrepreneurship by itself in the sense that you're asking an investment in your idea, right? And whether you self-fund, whether you fund through friends and family, whether you fund through your employer, whether you fund through some other means, it is asking for that investment. So I think that I think it just reflects the same gap in investment in innovation.
That makes sense. Arlyne, do you think if filing more intellectual property, which we discussed earlier, establishes a historical record of ownership, help women in engineering get the respect they already deserve?
That's a really good question. I certainly do feel like, when women do file more patents, it allows you to really establish yourself as a domain expertise in your area. And from an individual perspective, you're able to negotiate higher salaries, advance promotions. But I don't think we are at the level yet where more women getting patents is really going to allow women in engineering to get the respect that they deserve. Frankly, right now, only 13% of patent holders are women. And it's going to take a while before we get to gender parity. Until we get to that tipping point, maybe we're closer to 50%. Maybe that's when we'll see, that metric of women inventor rate being the thing that allows women to get that respect in engineering. Right now, with all the layoffs happening in tech, we see over 150,000 people, I believe, have been laid off right now in this economic downturn. And 45% of those impacted were women. On first glance, you may believe that, oh, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, but men and women are getting impacted at the same rate. But when you take a step back and you realize that only 25 to 30% of the engineers today are women, and you realize that 45% of the people losing their jobs are women, what the underlying issue here is very much gender bias, unconscious bias. And so until, upper management in tech and engineering are able to really address the root cause of gender bias, whether they do a tops-down approach and do like a seismic overhaul of the cultural shift in companies, or we have a bottoms-up approach where we work in K-12 environments and really allow kids to start seeing themselves as inventors and seeing themselves as engineers. And that's sort of the work that I do at Abbey Invents, then we're not really going to be able to make a dent in gender equity in engineering. But there is hope. That's why panels like this exist today. So there is hope that one day we do reach that gender equity that we all strive for.
Thank you. James, I'm going to direct this next question to you. The contributions of African American inventors are vast and varied, yet also largely unknown. You have helped shine a light on these pioneering contributions with your creation of the virtual Black Inventors Hall of Fame. How will a physical Black Inventors Hall of Fame museum, which I believe you are planning, make innovation potentially more inclusive?
Indeed, indeed. Yes, I am on a mission right now to design and build the country's first museum dedicated exclusively to immortalizing the pioneering genius of African American inventors for the past 400 years. Thank you, thank you. How would it be impactful? I'll give a very straightforward answer. Imagine, if you will, an 8-year-old child, right, of color, is in Elijah J. McCoy's Transportation Hall, of which the museum will have 4 major transportation halls, 4 major exhibit halls. And they're able to look up on the wall and see a likeness and image, and then read the story, and then being challenged to imagine how Elijah J. McCoy may very well have tackled a present-day issue, because the museum is going to be very much interactive, right? So that experience becomes even more visceral. And so when a child can feel it, and when a child can see it, and when they can hear it, they're motivated and they're inspired. And this is the goal of the Black Inventors Hall of Fame Museum. And I'll double down and explain to you why that is so important. My good friend Lonnie Johnson tells a story in my film, The Gathering, of how he had visited a school of a friend who had asked him to come and speak about his invention. And when he talked about his invention of the Super Soaker, all these young, impressionable kids in the classroom, all Black, they looked at Lonnie Johnson, and one little boy stood up and said, "You didn't design that. You didn't design that. Some white guy in the factory designed that toy," right? But see, this is what we need to dispel, the notion that our capacity and our innovative prowess is any less than the next person. And that's an additional goal of the museum, right? So that underserved kids across the entire country, because the museum will be built on the framework of the metaverse, underserved kids throughout the communities, right? The influence of the museum will be able to reach into every classroom. The tentacles of influence will be able to reach into every classroom in every household all throughout the country, right? So this is so important to inspire. And once you inspire a young kid, forget it, they're on their way. There's no stopping them, absolutely.
Something I've really appreciated today has been the focus on invention education, because I completely agree with you in that it's become very obvious to me if we want to raise this next generation of innovators that starts really young. I already had decided by the time I entered university that science couldn't possibly be for me. I wasn't good at it. I shouldn't try it. Then later as an adult realized how ridiculous, I'm fascinated by biology. I could have completely gone on another track if I had had earlier experiences that changed my mind. Arlyne, famously, you have said that kids should learn about inventing before they can even read, which I absolutely love. What are your thoughts on how we can help the next generation of problem solvers realize and see themselves as inventors earlier in their careers? And by careers, I really mean lives. Another way of asking, how can we make inventing more inclusive?
That's a great question, and that is my passion right there. There are many ways that we can make invention inclusive. I mean, by the definition, invention is all about identifying a problem to solve and creating a widget or a method to solve it. And there are three simple things that we can do. One, we can make it very culturally relevant. When I talk to kids, I invite them to invent with me. I say, what are some problems that you want to solve at school, at home, in the world? And I address them, I ask them their name and I address them as future inventor. So if their name is Mark, I say, hello, future inventor Mark. And just very simple, you can see how kids sort of like, pick up in their seats because they're like, wow, like you're calling me a name that I never really thought I could attach to my name. And then they will start listing out the problems they want to solve, And the other thing that we can do is by introducing kids to contemporary role model inventors. Very often kids are bombarded with the images of the lone white male entrepreneur or inventor. And even for myself, like when I was a graduate student, I saw the work I was doing in cancer diagnostics as research, not inventing. It wasn't until my advisor told me that we needed to file a provisional patent before you go present it at a conference did I really see myself as an inventor. Somebody had to tell me as a graduate student that I was inventing. And so introducing kids to inventors like Dr. Marian Croak, I mean, the reason I'm able to speak to you today virtually is because of her invention, voice over IP. And having gone through the pandemic, all kids are familiar with hybrid learning, remote learning. So her picture should be in every classroom. Her name should be a name that kids today know as easily as Albert Einstein, and we're making inventing relevant. And so these are some very simple things that we can do. We can introduce kids to books where they're able to see girl inventors getting patents. And what that does ultimately is when boy readers and girl readers, they read books like Abby Invents Unbreakable Crayons and they know what a patent is. Now it starts a conversation. I had a Barnes & Noble event this weekend, and this little girl, after I read the book, she was like, so how do I get a patent? Like, does somebody send it to me in the mail? Who do I ask for a patent? And it's probably her first time using a patent in a sentence, but now the awareness is there. And this is really how we really push the limit in getting more and more girls and boys of color to really see themselves as inventors.
If anyone would like to weigh in, please do. Okay, I'll move on. Maysa, I'd like to direct this your way. We cannot control how other people perceive us. We can control how we respond and how we treat others. While the percentage of intellectual property attorneys who are women continues to grow, there's no doubt that white men dominate the field. I'd be curious to hear if there are any barriers you've faced in your career, and if you have advice for other people who don't fit what we've decided or imagined, even though it isn't historically accurate, what an IP attorney is supposed to look like, or an inventor is supposed to look like, or a designer, any of the above.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. For undergrad, I went to school for theater, and I spent a lot of my time being an advocate for like my friends that were artists that didn't really know how to navigate, navigate that world. After school, I went into marketing, and Raphael, your discussion on how the marketing world doesn't necessarily know everything about IP. I was that marketing professional, and I fought with our IP attorney, and I was working in finance, and being a woman in finance is also quite difficult. I saw that I was a trusted advisor to some of the partners in finance that I was working with, but I also saw how they treated me differently, and as a younger person, it shakes your confidence. I remember, and I worked in a tax firm, one of the accountants wouldn't look at me in the eye every time I went into his office, and then I realized it was because he felt uncomfortable because I was a woman. In that world, it's very hard to succeed, and so being a woman in this space, there's a lot of competition between women. I was fighting with the IP attorney all the time, and I didn't understand why I was wrong in a lot of cases, because she eventually would just say, it's fine, whatever, do what you want to do to me. When I got off the phone with the IP attorney at one point, I was like, I can do that job. And I said, I'm going to go to law school. And it was the same time as like the Pro IP Act, and so I started getting interested in everything. But what I learned from that experience is really, how to be a better counselor when I became an attorney. You have to listen to your client. You have to explain things to them. You can't just say no, because legal is known for always saying no, You have to build a strategy, and whatever your client wants, you make it happen. And I really like the IP space because I did have a creative background. I was like, I could go help artists achieve their dreams. And I ended up in the brand protection world. I really wanted, when I first started to do patent litigation, and I met some patent attorneys that were these white men, and they weren't very inclusive, and they didn't want to really work with me. But when I was working at a small boutique firm, I was able to work with this Argentine attorney who was managing portfolios on trademarks for some very big luxury brands in Latin America. And then I learned about how interesting IP could be in different jurisdictions. And then that's where I got the bug that, like the international aspect of trademark law. And then I saw how different perspectives really matter in this space, and that's really what has, fueled my passion in my world. I've learned a lot from paralegals. One of my first bosses was a paralegal, and I know a lot of times attorneys say, "Oh, paralegals are not as great." I'm like, when I was working at the International Trademark Association, a lot of the time, some of the people that were participating there, they would say, like, I'm a paralegal. Like, are you sure you want me to be the chair of this committee? I'm like, yes, you are intelligent. You are amazing. Yes, I do. I think discounting people for who they are, or just by like a snap judgment, I think you're doing them a disservice. And in my current position, there was a post for this job at Moderna, and in brand protection for pharmaceuticals, it's usually done by the security team. The security team's made of a lot of law enforcement people, and if you know what a law enforcement person looks like, I do not look like a law enforcement person. And when I was interviewing, I saw who I was interviewing for, my current boss. He is 6'3", white male. He was in the military. He's like the exact opposite of me. So when I was interviewing, I thought, oh, this guy's not going to like me. But I think that was my misperception of him, and that was a barrier to me. And I just think that the barriers go both ways. So I think that that's something that we have to be really mindful of. And I think the different perspectives are really important. And I think when you are a creator, look for someone with a similar perspective. I know, James, you touched on that. You want an advocate who's in your corner, who understands you. And there are so many brilliant attorneys of all shapes and sizes. Find one that you like, find one that's specializing in your area. Don't always have the patent attorney file your trademark. So that, yeah, I think that's the advice. And I do think that you should think of barriers as opportunities to learn from. And so that's something that I've learned on my personal journey to where I am now.
That's great advice. At this time, I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions for our panelists. I hope that you have some, and if you don't, I have many more. So don't be shy now.
Hi, so my name is Stephanie Sutendal, and I'm the founder and CEO of Matrix Holograms. We are democratizing education that's reserved for the top 1% to US public schools in low-income countries with AI holograms. So one of the biggest obstacles that I would say that I have as a startup founder is how difficult it is to patent technology. And that is something that is, of course, for our investors, that's always something that they ask is what we're investing on is already very risky, being something that doesn't have any track record, is emerging technology. So how are you protecting your company and your technology? So I discussed with Tiffany earlier, and she had some really great feedback on what is able to be done. And I did want to ask you guys, with your expertise, what can a ed tech company do if, for example, let's say there is no way that we can patent our technology so that we can be ahead of the game, especially when we're in a very, very fragile state of being pre-market, still in development?
I think that's a great question, if I might try that for a second. So we focused a lot on, during this conversation, on intellectual property specifically, but I think more broadly to use it as a tool to raise investment, to continue commercializing your technology. It has to be situated much more holistically within a framework of protection, and also how you're going to actually use that to raise the money, which it's not as if you just have the patent and someone's interesting what is actually in that claim maybe. And so I think there are ways that you could keep moving forward that don't have to explicitly do with intellectual property, but that can offer you some protection. That could look like building out a really talented group of people who are working for you and establishing trust that way and taking away the risk, which is really what the investors are wondering, is they're like, this is so risky. We can't bet on you until you take away some of this risk. Maybe there's a way of bringing on advisors who are kind of tacitly seeing what you're doing and also lending their halo. Working a network, sort of before you're talking to people, really investigating, is this someone I can trust? Should I share my idea with this entity? I think are some questions to consider more broadly than just, am I able to get a patent, how soon? Please, panelists.
Yeah, you know, what you have is very, very common in tech, right? Because very often you go ahead because you have an idea and you do have intellectual capital, maybe you don't have intellectual property yet, right? You know, I remember helping companies for a couple of friends who were sort of course, they were entirely in my area, which not in your area. By the way, my area is networking, communications, reliable communication security. But you know, I remember just saying, okay, let's do an inventory, just like you would in any business, right? What do you have and what do you do, right? And some of the things are you doing something well, but you know, it's not unique. You're just doing something competently, and then there might be a few things that are core. And first do an inventory, and then see if you can protect it, right? But often, even in the process of doing that inventory, you will see your strengths. You may also see where you may have some holes. So I think that just as in general hygiene, for anything, do an inventory. So do an inventory of your intellectual property, of your intellectual capital, and see if some of that can be turned into intellectual property. That would be my advice.
I would advise as well to consider scaling, starting small, right? Perhaps identify an isolated region in which you can expose your product, but yet not be totally exposed, and then seek to scale up from there. You know, there are many opportunities, and if all else fails, you do what my friend used to say, you punt, right? And therefore, you take that intellectual capital that Muriel speaks of and maybe redirect it into alternative applications and so forth. But you must know that it's your intellectual capital, right? And so it belongs to you. And no one should be able to shift your trajectory of eventually, you know, seeking franchise from that.
Well, thank you very much. And I definitely do have to say that we are in a very vulnerable position as well, because we've garnered, because of the type of technology that we developed is very different and very new. So we were already at Davos, Bloomberg TV wants to film our beta testing. So of course, I'm already around lawyers saying, what can I even reveal at this point if we don't have anything patentable? And that puts us in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah.
So yeah, likewise, something that is really great is being partnered with IBM is already a step up in being exclusive when it comes to investors. But at the same time, it's all about, yes, but somebody can right now take that idea and run with it. So yeah, I definitely do have to say that I did actually have a final thought, and that was, do white papers cover any type of intellectual property? In case, no, not at all. Okay.
No, 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 no,
Okay.
no.
So we just have our secret sauce as like the most strongest thing.
Do not publish a white paper until, I mean, no, that's to disseminate. It's not to, you know, that might be give you priority of intellectual priority and bragging rights, and that might prevent somebody else from patenting it. But definitely, I mean, I shouldn't be talking, I'm not the lawyer, but you know, that for heaven's sake, no, no. That's no.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I think she said no.
And I will say there's trade secret, which we haven't really talked about. So you might, that's how you protect your ideas through contracts mostly. So I would look into that. It's trade secret. Trade secret is another way of protecting ideas without having rights. So it's like the recipe for Coca-Cola cannot be protected, but it's protected somewhere. It's locked in a drawer somewhere, I guess. And the key's been thrown away.
But also, you know, you might want to do the white paper if you're afraid. If you say, look, I can't protect it, but I'm afraid of other people trying to patent it and closing me off from my own property, which can happen. That's good. That's defensive. So sometimes you do, like defensive publishing, we do that all the time, right? I'm not going to go for intellectual property for this. It's too expensive. I don't have the budget. I can't satisfy it, but as sure as heck don't want somebody else to patent it. Then you're basically getting authorship, but it doesn't protect your intellectual property, but it certainly avoids others from blocking you.
Stephanie. So a lot of times we get young women, kids of color, in the high school years to work on an invention project, and then they decide that they really can do this kind of work and that they can be successful in STEM, even though that's not what they'd done in the past. So then they go on to four-year college and they enroll in like computer science or one of the other fields prone to patenting, and they're up against young people who've known they wanted to be that from an early age and have been nurtured by their family members, et cetera, and they find it's just too hard and they drop out. And so I've often thought that we need to grab onto those women and we need to have a corporate connection so they can see if they can hold out, if they can last, there's a place for them at the end of their degree. So that's just my guess, but you guys have made it. And so I'm wondering if you have any insights. What should we be doing you know, when we get them to change their mind about who they can be, what should we be doing to hold them there for those 4 years until they graduate?
Great question.
That sounds very much like my story because I did not have any role models per se in my family. I'm a first generation college student on my mom's side. And I think what held me there, despite the failures and imposter syndrome and people sort of telling me I only got into college because of affirmative action, is having mentors and having programs that universities typically have that really try to encourage underrepresented students, women, to stick with it. And so for me, I had the Ronald E. McNair program, which is a program that's all about showing first generation college students that they can attain a PhD. If I did not have that program or did not even see the flyer to join that program, chances are I would not be speaking to you today because I probably would have quit. Because it certainly does get hard. It does feel very isolating. There are many times where you're the only woman, the only Black person in the classroom. And so I would strongly suggest or advise that if you are aware of any students in that situation, to have them find the programs like Ronald E. McNair program, Meyerhoff Scholars in University of Maryland, FACES Scholars. There are lots of programs that are meant to sort of hold the hand of these students to make them stick with it. And internships help. Internships help you see that, you know what, nobody else in my family is doing this, but I'm seeing how my classes are relevant to the real world. So maybe I can do this, because I'm hearing people say, I don't know, in meetings, and these are people who have PhDs too. So maybe I'm okay.
Do you mind if I get in a final comment? Stephanie, this is why. Uh-oh. I better make it good, Bruce. This is why I believe invention education is so important, right? But not at the collegiate level, but at grade school level. And this is why so many great organizations, such as the National Inventors Hall of Fame, STEAM NOLA, A-STEAM Village, and all sorts of programs that are geared to excite students today, right? But that responsibility can't just be amongst the organizations. Schools need to embrace the notion of invention education, K through 12. And then I think that journey that you spoke of about these young ladies being somewhat intimidated as they move further on, well, if they're informed at the onset, I don't think you'll have those numbers drop off later on at all. They'll stick and they'll preserve, and they'll do great things. But it all begins with, I believe, invention education.
Thank you all so much.